Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and we're back again with another Spirit Island video. So I swear this is a Spirit Island video, but my favorite sport to play is Ultimate Frisbee, hence the Ultrastar profile picture. I want to start with a clip from last year's Nationals in the first matchup between DC Truck Stop in green and the eventual champions, Denver's Johnny Bravo in white. If you don't know how the sport is played, basically, you get a touchdown like in football, except you can only do so with passing plays. Walking or running while holding the disc is not allowed. Let's see it.
And almost getting that block. Ben Laurie almost gets it back. Over to Landesman. And Quinn Finer is open.
He slaps his own butt. Good job, self. But let's watch it one more time. The clip starts out with the handlers jockeying for position while the cutter's set up. And let's pause it here. The next throw will be the one that scores. In this clip, only half the players on the field actually matter. So the handler has the disc in his hands and he will make the next throw. We can see there are 3 downfield cutters, A, B, and C, that are defended by defenders 1, 2, and 3. Cutter A is guarded by defender 1, etc. Cutter A is the first to make a move, attacking the front left corner of the end zone. Cutter B is the second to move, attacking the right side of the end zone. And then Cutter C doesn't actually do anything at all, he's just standing still. So defenders 1 and 2 both chase the first move coming from Cutter A. This double team is what causes Cutter B to make his move to the right side. Seeing that Cutter B is attacking the right side is what makes defender 3 attack the right side. And so this is what all the movements of the 5 players look like. After these movements happen, there are 3 spots that the handler could throw to. I've identified these 3 spots with red circles, and in those circles is the number of defenders guarding that space. As we can see, there's an obvious mismatch in various parts of the field. Cutter A is double teamed, so he's not a smart target for the throw. However, since he pulled an extra defender onto himself, that leaves a double team the other way on the other side of the field to his team's advantage. It's all a matter of execution. As the clip finishes, we can see the defender isn't able to guard both cutters simultaneously, so a point is scored. So who deserves the most credit for this point being scored? Cutter B is going to be the happiest and will receive all the praise and glory from the fans and the broadcasters. His stat sheet will look better than everyone else's by scoring this point. But why did he get open at all? See, Cutter A beat his man out of the stack, forcing defender 2 to come in and set up that double team. So Cutter A deserves a lot of praise for being so threatening that he opened up the opportunity for his teammate to score. Cutter C seemingly didn't do anything, and yet that was the absolute best thing that he could do. If he takes a step in any direction, he would get in the middle of the opportunities his teammates were creating. By simply standing there, he's a scoring threat, and that means that defender 3 cannot leave or else an easy point would be given up. So imagine if the handler did a pump fake to Cutter B, pulling off defender 3, and instead the handler threw it to Cutter C. Now Cutter C gets all the praise and glory and boost to his stat sheet, and the dude was just standing still. While each cutter made the correct move individually, the point was only scored because they did so collectively and simultaneously. If any one of the 3 cutters did something different, it's reasonable to believe that no goal is scored here. So what does this have to do with Spirit Island? Spirit Island is a team game, and field sports such as Ultimate are an area control game. These past few months, I have been simultaneously making Spirit Island videos on this channel, as well as doing analysis and strategy videos for my team's channel. Perhaps I'm just doing a poor job of keeping the 2 subjects separate from each other in my own brain, but I think there are lessons from athletics which can be applicable to analyzing and discussing Spirit Island. In Ultimate, different players have different skill sets. and we assign positions and construct strategies around the talent pool we have on hand. It is not a slight or a personal attack to have your assignments curated to hide your weaknesses. That's just good strategy. Personally, I know that I don't have a great vertical, so I'm never assigned to the deep role on offense or defense. However, I know that I have a good undercut and continuation throw, so that's where I position myself on the field. In Spirit Island, each spirit approaches the game in a different way. Some use Dahan as their primary source of damage, and other spirits kill off Dahan with their powers. Some spirits open aggressively, and others scale up over time. We must adjust our playstyle to one that is optimal for the spirits that we have present. We must find ways to mitigate our weaknesses and accent our strengths. So in this video, I want to try and create an idealized guide for the mid-game in a multiplayer setting. I think first we have to actually define what is the mid-game. And I think a pretty simple way to frame the early, mid, and late game is as follows. In the early game, you're asking yourself, how do I survive and establish my position? In the mid game, you're asking, how can I get ahead and build a winning position? And in the late game, you're asking, how quickly can I win this game? In the early game, spirits have to walk an incredibly thin tightrope trying to maximize the value of everything they do in order to survive while they are weak and at a disadvantage. Setting up the early game properly is crucial for a successful game, but it is also the most controlled portion of the game with the least amount of variance from events and other things. So it is where you will see most guides spend most of their time. It's hard to provide explicit instructions when there's so much variance that has occurred after the first few turns. So instead of trying to be too explicit, I simply want to opine on my vision to improve mid-game play. When you hop into a multiplayer game, everyone has their own starting board with only their presence. We become subconsciously attached to our starting board, and we prioritize it over all other boards. Often, people will ask permission if it's okay to gather a Dahan off another player's board or push invaders onto that board. Our starting board is like our castle, a physical representation of our own skill and competency. That tiny gap where the boards touch becomes a near insurmountable barrier to cross with our presence and our powers. And this is a fatal flaw. At the start of the game, every board is going to look basically the same in terms of invaders. But as we get into the mid-game, that's no longer the case. Even though each board is explored, built, and ravaged in all the same lands, the way each player elected to navigate their early game is going to be wildly different. Every spirit is so unique to the others that it causes each board to resolve in different ways. If any single player loses, the whole team loses. Similarly in Ultimate, if one player gets scored on, the entire team is down a point. The best teams rarely opt into pure man defense, where each defender is completely tied to one offensive player. Inevitably, man defenses fall apart when a mismatch is found and exploited. In Spirit Island, the equivalent of a pure man defense would be every spirit exclusively tending to their own board. In Spirit Island, you can get very far by just sharpening your solo skills, but eventually something will go wrong. Maybe you completely whiff on a power gain, or an event ruins your position. But we should not expect to have an absolute dominance over our board 100% of the times. Maybe you watch my videos and you think I'm a perfect player because I've never lost on the channel before. But here's the secret. If I lose, I just make a new recording. The reality is, I lose games all the time. I'm far from perfect, and that's okay. In Ultimate Frisbee, even if you have absolute dominance over the guy that you're guarding, crazy things can happen. Maybe you slip on the grass, or the wind is out to get you, but even the best players can get beat. So what you'll see instead, the best teams are going to run a spectrum of defensive structures with a range of sagging, poaching, and switching. In other words, they do not tether themselves to only guarding one guy. All of the players are cognizant of each other and leverage each other's positional and skill advantages to create the best team possible. The same is true in Spirit Island. You see, Spirit Island is a zero-sum game. Every time a power is used in one land, it is not being used in another. The entire team collectively only has so much power and so many resources. Very often, it's optimal for us to use our cards on other boards because they are more efficient there. Let's say that you have Nature's Resilience, which can defend for 6. All too often, I will see players simply snap use this card on their own board. Maybe they just have it like an explorer in a town that's ravaging. But then they'll ignore a city, town, explorer that's also ravaging on a neighboring board. By defending the neighboring ravage, all 6 of that defense from the card is being used, as opposed to 3 being effectively wasted. Since you're helping out your neighbor, they can return the favor and solve your smaller ravage with something like Shatter Homesteads. On paper, that's so blatantly obvious. Yet in reality, opportunities like this are missed all the time. One of the best parts about playing with your friends is that you'll have better communication with each other, relative to strangers, since you should be more comfortable with each other. Recently, I played a very satisfying game against England 6. Take a look at these screenshots. They're from the spirit phase of each turn. Watch how differently the boards develop over the course of the game. A lot of effort was put into clearing and then keeping empty board B, and it allowed the Fangs player to be very active across the whole island. Ocean is also a spirit that likes to spread out across all the boards, and very quickly it felt like a 4-spirit, 2-board game. This game was played incredibly efficiently, with each spirit willingly using their powers anywhere on the board that they could leverage the entire effect. So now we finally come full circle. I started this video off by showing a clip of a goal being scored in an ultimate match, and I posed the question, who deserves the most praise for making this play happen? My answer was that every player was crucial to that goal being scored. As a coach, I will intentionally point out each of the other guys that did not score and help them understand their contribution to the team and make them feel better about it all. If a player doesn't feel seen and respected, they will be less likely to make sacrifice plays in the future. So let's take a look at these pictures and ask ourselves the same question. Who deserves the most praise for making this game a victory? Obviously, we can see that the right 2 boards were emptied pretty quickly, and it was basically a 2-board game. Perhaps we should credit Ocean and Fangs, as they were able to clear their boards very quickly. Of course, we know from experience that this wouldn't have happened unless they received support from Lightning and Bodan. So maybe we should give credit to those 2 instead, because they sacrificed their board's position in order to solve the other boards. In reality, all of the players were crucial to the success of the team. Ignoring the spirits chosen and instead only looking at the state of the boards, which of these players would you like to be? And I think that answer comes down to player psychology. What is it that you find satisfying? Some people revel in the success of others, whereas other people want to be lifted to never-before-seen heights. Neither is necessarily wrong, but I think either extreme is toxic and antithetical to good teamwork. So really, the core of my argument in this video is that we must be willing to invest our resources onto other players' starting boards. We must be willing to forgo our own starting board for the greater good of the team. It's easy to agree while calmly watching a video, but not necessarily while in the heat of battle. So let's say we put aside pride. We're willing to do whatever is necessary for the greater good. Now the question is, what is the absolute minimum that is required to maximize the impact that you can have on other boards? I think it's reasonable for our first couple growth to be purely local, but how quickly can we start donating presents? And how much presents really has to go out at all? This is the kind of thing that's hard to do objective analysis on, but let's start with a bit of data as a foundation upon which to build our thinking. The first thing that comes to my mind when considering donating presents is how much needs to go out, and a good proxy for that is how much do we need sacred sites. Here is a chart of all the spirits and how many powers and abilities require sacred sites. The highest possible number for this would be 7, since most spirits start with 4 starting cards, 2 innate powers, and 1 special rule. As we can see, all of the spirits in the game are in the 0 to 3 range. Intuitively, we can expect that spirits with more sacred site requirements should be less capable of spreading out onto other boards, or at least less effective when they do so, and those with less sacred site requirements can really spread out. Of course, that analysis is flawed. Shroud of Silent Mist isn't exactly known for throwing their presence around willy-nilly across the board. They need to have clouds of presence, since much of its damage is based on adjacent lands with presence. There are some other factors to consider as well. How mobile is your spirit's presence? Most spirits cannot move their presence once it is placed, but many can. Spirits like Finder and Downpour have a spot on their presence tracks that allow them to move a presence in the spirit phase, whereas other spirits like Mud and Teeth have an innate that let them move their presence. Having mobile presence means you can get away with less on your board because you can adjust your presence as necessary. On the other hand, we also have to have consideration for the range of their abilities. As I mentioned, Teeth has good mobility of presence with his innate, and doesn't require any sacred sites, so we could expect him to be everywhere. However, every single ability in his kit is range 0, which significantly weakens him. A common issue with Teeth is that you can't actually do things in the land that you want to because you're struggling to get there for targeting reasons. So we have to compensate for that. One last thing to consider is special powers tied to the presence itself. Wildfire and Whirlwind affect the invaders just by growing, so they have an incentive to spread out wide. Almost every turn they can find value just through growth and not by using any powers. If that's on another board, so be it. They can grow, have that immediate impact, and then turn their attention back home. Even if they aren't using that presence immediately, down the line it could become useful. So anyways, here's my rough hierarchy for how effective different spirits are for spreading out and assisting other boards. So up here at the top, the amazing tier, I've got Ocean, Lure, River, Serpent, Trickster, and Finder. Ocean is probably the first one that everyone was thinking of because you classically open with Growth 2, put your presence on every board, at which point now you are literally everywhere. But some of these other ones might not have come to your mind immediately. I find Lure is fantastic at spreading out because you don't require any sacred sites, and you just gather things into yourself, and so wherever you put your presence, you have a nice big range of influence. So with one single presence on another person's board, you can have significant impact. You can affect most of the board with just one single presence, and that really provides a lot of value. River can create sacred sites with only one presence, and so you can just drop your presence in wetlands all across the island, and that way you have tons of flexibility with which to use all of your powers. Serpent has that Aegis, so you can defend everything around you, and so very often you're incentivized to go to key places around the island where you can defend 3 or 4 lands of the same terrain. Trickster doesn't require any sacred sites, and there's very specific build-ups of land that he can be especially effective in. So something like, an Explorer Town City, he can, strafe the city and kill off the Explorer Town, and then push a few Dahan in there. So wherever you have those specific combinations of invaders come up, Trickster is very, very efficient at dealing with that specific size. And so you can create tons of value efficiently by just picking those off wherever. And then Finder naturally wants to spread out and, basically eviscerate their own board quickly and then help all the other invaders bring their boards together. You're very good at making pockets, so you really don't need to have presence on your board because most of your board won't be able to be explored anyways. In the next tier, we have Good. So I've got Thunder Speaker, Wildfire, Green, Many Minds, Eyes, Whirlwind, and Downpour. These spirits are very good at going out to other boards, but sometimes it takes a little bit more in order to be effective. So Thunder Speaker probably can't do any spreading out until like turn 4 or 5, because they want to stay local. They need to have a certain number of presence on their board, so that way you have the multiplicative effect with your presence and the Dahan with your manifestation. Other spirits like Green Eyes take sacred sites. So while these spirits can be very efficient and effective without too much, or just their play style allows them to spread out a little bit more aggressively, it's just, a one tier below. Then we have the middle tier, the OK tier. We've got Heat, Lightning, Keeper, Teeth, Starlight, Memory, and Bringer. Someone like Lightning would normally go much higher on this tier list if Lightning could actually put more presence on the board. The big problem with Lightning is that it's really hard to grow without perpetually reclaim looping, so that knocks him down a few tiers. Other spirits like Starlight can very easily travel to other boards and be perfectly fine. The problem is actually getting there, since your growth is only at range 0 and you have to push your presence other places. That makes it a lot harder just to physically reach the other spots. Keeper is another one that can be very effective, but he wants to have a bunch of sacred sites in a close area to each other for that one unique power card, and so it just takes a little bit longer before you're really spreading out. Anyways, just going to go through this quickly. In the bad tier, I've got Mud, Earth, Shadows, Stone, Fangs, and Vengeance. Fangs and Vengeance do damage based on tokens, and so if you don't have a critical mass of tokens in a land, you just become less effective. Now, you can draft cards that are not token dependent and use those in other lands, and then use your token reliant powers on your own board, and that is a way that you could spread out and around and be more effective, but it simply gives you a narrower path by which you can help others. And they both lose extra points because they both like to sacrifice their presence to create those tokens. So if you don't have enough presence on your starting board, you just sacrifice your own starting board in order to help someone else out, and you just have this back and forth pressure that's kind of hard. Stone is another one. It's kind of tricky to place on this list. Maybe he could go up a tier, because putting one presence in anywhere on the board is incredibly effective, but if you're not actively removing Blight, then you keep on having to add presence back to your own lands in order to stay ahead of that Blight count in any one single land. So it's tricky. I usually find when I play Stone, I will add one presence, sometimes two, on another player's board where something is particularly spicy and really well built up in the mid to late game. But because that is so late in the game, I'm putting him down much lower on this tier list. And then the bottom tier, we have the solo players. That's going to be Mist, Volcano, and Fractured Days. Mist, as I alluded to before, needs to have that cloud of presence. You can stretch out and go to other boards, but you have a much narrower path there. And since you don't come in with a lot of raw power, but instead you're kind of like this engine, it takes a lot of work to spread over to other boards, and you're not necessarily effective when you do so. Also, because you don't kill invaders, you're never clearing your own board, and so you always have reasons to stay home, and it's hard to justify getting out. Volcano obviously just stacks up in one land, and you do have the extra range, so you can impact other boards. Of course, also, you can have your starting presence be at where two boards come together, and so you're working on both sides. But for the purposes of this tier list, you're keeping all of your presence in one board, and so that's why you're here. Now, once again, there's another spirit that you can definitely move in the late game. You completely explode your local area with like a 6 or 10 presence explosion, and then you go somewhere else and start trying to chip in somewhere else, but that is usually in the very late game. And then Fractured Days, you're just trying to keep yourself alive while you basically subvert the rules of the game for everyone else. So you're typically not winning the game by actually impacting the board, but by manipulating the game itself while just keeping yourself alive. So anyways, that's just a broad thing here. In general, I like to keep my tier lists pretty much as even as possible from tier to tier in terms of quantity, because I feel like there's diminishing returns for trying to get too particular. So while working on this video, some people started receiving their copies of Nature Incarnate and posting the pictures online. So we can do some surface level analysis of these new spirits. Starting with the quantity of sacred sites required, Breath of Darkness down your spine, Dancing Up Earthquakes, and Wounded Waters Bleeding need 0 sacred sites. Ember Eyes Behemoth, Hearth Vigil, and Wandering Voices Keen Delirium, they need 1, or they have 1 power that requires a sacred site. Towering Roots of the Jungle has 3 powers to take a sacred site. And then setting a new record, Relentless Gaze of the Sun has 6 powers requiring a sacred site. So much more than anyone else. The Incarnate throw a wrench into our analysis because Breath and Voice have very mobile Incarnate. They have that left innate, which lets them move their Incarnate around. And so I expect that they could help out with many boards. With 6 things needing sacred sites, I would expect that Sun will be much worse at helping other boards, but then again, it does have a good amount of mobility through its innate and its power card. So hey, who knows? It'll be very exciting to find out. The last question is, how much do I actually need to help? Not much. Sometimes just one well-placed defendant Dahan can create a massive snowball effect which can win the game. Sometimes delaying a Blighted Island for 1 turn, or getting 1 more fear card can tip the scales in our favor. I hope that we can change our mentality to aggressively support each other and play fluidly across the whole island, not just our starting boards. Not only will this increase our win rates, but it's also more fun. I hope you guys enjoyed and appreciated this conversation, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say in the comments. Until next time, have a great day.